welcome to tonight's webinar. Who would God vote for? This is sure to be an interesting conversation. I've invited people that totally disagree with what I think about this. I've got a lot of people that agree with what I think, but I'm really excited to have this discussion. My guest tonight is Dr. David Barton of Wallbuilders Ministries. I'm going to ask him some tough questions. Every time I've done so in the past, he's handled it like it was no big deal. I was in youth group, our youth group where my kids go, a couple nights ago, and as I joined the conversation there, the youth pastor said, "You guys got to be ready always. You guys got to be ready to give an answer." He said, "Somebody give me a question about creation." And then he threw it to me. He did another one, threw it to me. Did another one, threw it to me. What about dinosaurs? How can a loving God send people to hell? And thankfully, because of what I do, I was able to answer those. That's the way I feel about Dr. David Barton with Wallbuilders, because I go, what's going on in our country? What has Trump done? Who should we vote for? What's really happening here? Where you ask him anything about the founding fathers, he's got the answer. I've thoroughly enjoyed. Many of you might have already gone through his Founding Fathers series. They're going through the founding of America. So I'm really pleased to have him on with me. Dr. Barton, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Eric. Great to be with you, man. Thanks for having me. Love being with you.
Well, I got a big question that I'm asking, and I'm hoping at least by the end of the night, we can get down to this answer of who would God vote for? What comes to your mind when you first hear that question? What do you think? And or I don't know if you're just going to give the answer out of the gate here, or if you're like, well, let's talk about this. Let's because some people want just tell me and then I'll move on. Other people are like, okay, build me up to this answer. What do you think of when you hear that question?
When I hear that question, I'm reminded of both a Bible account and a historical account. And when I hear that question, I would reverse it and say, not who would God vote for, but who would vote for God. And I say that in the sense of when you have Joshua who is going out to fight the Canaanites, and he saw that guy in the middle of the road and said, "Oh, whose side are you on?" He said, "I'm the angel of the Lord." And so, "Oh, I'm on your side." And so Joshua says, "Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to ask whose side you were on. I should have said, I'm on your side." And so in the Civil War, same thing happened. Abraham Lincoln, intensely involved in the Civil War, was walking through the White House, heard a group of ministers speaking. And one of the ministers made the comment, said, "I sure hope God's on the Union side in this war." Lincoln stopped, turned around, went back, interrupted the conversation, said, "Sir, that's not my desire. My desire is that I be on the Lord's side in this contest." And so I think that's the real question here, is not who would God vote for. God's already got standards laid out real clear on what he wants to see. The question is who's going to vote for God's standards and line up behind God's standards. So I would actually reverse that question, and from that, and that makes it pretty easy actually to look at candidates. Which candidate is voting for God by their actions, by their words, by their behavior? And by the way, I put their behavior and their actions way above their words. Words mean very little, but Jesus said, "Judge a tree by its fruits." And I would look at the candidates. They both have voting records. They both have ruling records. I would look at them not only from president. I'd look at U.S. senators, U.S. congressmen, right on down, and see which of those people are voting for God, and then I would get behind them.
So I've had some interesting emails come back to me about this conversation that we're going to have tonight. I don't see him on here yet. I'm hoping he'll join us. I invited a young man who sent me an email that I thought was kind of telling, because I thought, man, this is kind of conspiracy theory 101, what I'm hearing here. Jeremy said, well, listen, he sent me this email. He said, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are Freemasons. God would not want me voting for two Satanists. That's absurd in itself. Do you happen to know? I mean, I got this and I'm like, well, first of all, I've never even looked this up, but I've never heard of the idea that Trump is a Freemason. Do you have any knowledge on that?
You know, the first thing I would do in a situation like that is, my question would be, where's your evidence for that? Show me the evidence that Trump is a Freemason or that Biden is a Freemason. Once you can show me that evidence. Now, I've seen a ton of articles out there, but also there's people that probably claim the sun comes up in the east and goes down, or it comes up in the west and goes down in the east. So just because there's an article doesn't mean it. Where's the evidence? Where's the proof? The other thing I would point to goes back to what I mentioned a minute ago. You judge a tree by its fruits. Okay, let's assume that Trump is a Satanist. If he is, he will produce the fruit of a Satanist. An apple tree is going to produce apple fruit. Now, I will point out that right now, in regards to legal cases, Satanists are very active in litigation in two particular areas. One particular area where they're very active in is in abortion cases. Only Planned Parenthood and the Satanists, they're the two top litigants against abortion laws. They are very anti-life. They're not pro-life. Well, I look at Trump and say he's the most pro-life president in American history. So how can you say he's a Satanist when the fruit he produces is not the fruit Satanists produce? I would also look and say, well, Satanists are very clear that they're against Israel and against God's people. He may be the most pro-Israel president we've ever had. That's not the fruit of a Satanist. I look at religious liberties. Again, Satanists are very active in the court in fighting religious expressions, Christian expressions, and they have been up to now, and yet Trump keeps going the opposite direction. And the judges he's putting on the court, now 220 of them, have been some of the most pro-Constitution, pro-religious liberty judges we have seen in our lifetime. I will tell you without hyperbole, this is just a fact, literally, we are able as Christians in the last 2 years, we are now able to do things religiously we've not been able to do in 60 years. These judges are reversing major Supreme Court decisions we've had, and this is Trump. So you're telling me that a guy who is pro-religious liberty, pro-Israel, pro-life, pro-constitutional judges is a Satanist? I don't buy the fruit. But again, my first question is, where's your proof that he is, other than just a bunch of blogs that are out there making all sorts of claims?
Well, Jeremy, I got to say, I think what David said to you there is hitting the nail on the head. Where's the proof is a great question. And conspiracy theory or not, you got to have the evidence. Jason, by the way, there's a chat feature, guys, in this webinar. If you hover your mouse over the video, or if you're on a mobile device, if you just tap the screen, you'll see the little chat feature. I want to encourage you to use that. Ask questions, and I'll be kind of the mediator, or the Q&A section. Use that Q&A panel right there. I think it says Q&A. And you can, actually, I'm looking at it right here. Q&A, yes. You can ask a question. I'll bring that to David's attention. David, I had Jason write in. He said, I was just having this conversation with my neighbor last Sunday. The verse that was brought up was 2 Timothy 2:4. And I want to read the verse here. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4 says this: no one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And he used that to say, wait a minute, we don't need to get involved in the affairs of this life. He said, that's why I don't think we should get involved in civilian affairs. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I hope he doesn't drive a car or use media or listen to TV or have an air conditioner or a heater or anything else, because those are the affairs of this life. Now, who's going to draw, who defines what this life is? Now, again, I like to go back to the Bible. And when I look at the Bible, beginning in Genesis, I see that God created an individual, a person. And then after he created a person, the next thing we see is a family, because you have Eve, then you have Abel, Cain, and Seth. So now we go from a person to a family. And then in Genesis 9, we go to civil government. God ordains it. He gives 7 laws. He said, this is how you live. This is what you do with murderers. This is what you do with thieves. They're called the Noahide laws. Then as we get over into the book of Exodus, we see that God ordains the congregation. Here's how I want vertical worship conducted, vertical relationship. We would call that the church. Now, those are 4 forms of government. Those are 3 institutions: the institution of the family, the institution of civil government, the institution of the church. If you go to 4 forms of government, you have self-government, you have family government, you have civil government, and you have church government. They're government for all 4. God has very clear verses to all 4. It's interesting that regarding civil government, I can ask Christians today, give me 5 verses, give me a verse you can think, and I've done this with groups of pastors before. Give me every verse you can think of about civil government. 7 or 8, 9 or 10 in the room, verses. I'll show you one book from John Locke, written in 1690. It's called The 2 Treatises of Civil Government. In that book, he references the Bible over 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government. If the Bible talks about it that much, tell me that that's not something big on God's mind. Tell me that that's an affair of this life when God spends so much time on it. And tell me why he gives us even Romans 13, where he says that those in government are, quote, ministers of God. They're there to minister for your good. They bear the sword, not in vain. That's the same word minister we use for church ministers. So how is that not an affair of God? So I think sometimes we take our wishes or our desires and superimpose them on God. I try to do the best I can to look what the Bible says, what the Bible shows, and then conform my wishes to what he shows. And, the other thing I would point to is when you get over into Hebrew, and people can say, well, you're talking Old Testament, not New. Okay, let's talk New Testament. Let's talk the New Covenant. Let's talk over Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, we have all these heroes of our faith that are held up to us. That's a great cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 12:1. And it's an interesting thing that most of those great cloud of witnesses and most of those heroes of our faith are all in civil government. Whether it's David, whether it's Daniel, whether it's Joseph, whether it's whoever it is, so many of them are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were governors in Babylon. I mean, why would God hold up for so many civil leaders and say, these are your examples if government is an affair of this life? So I would kind of dispute the premise of the question. And I would say, well, again, why not your car, or why not your house, or, why not be John the Baptist and just eat locusts and honey and have a bear skin around you? Why choose politics and say this is of this life when nothing else is?
I think that's a great response. And I got a couple more questions that have come in. However, I just got an update as of just a few minutes ago. I don't know if are you like the guy that scrolls Twitter and keeps looking to see what happens? Do you know what just happened a few minutes ago?
No, what happened?
The Supreme Court nominee, Judge Amy Coney Barrett, has just been confirmed by the Supreme Court.
That's right.
So that's awesome. That's awesome. So anyway, I had to throw that out there. Back to some of the questions I had, because I had some Christians say that they are just going to abstain from voting this time. They're saying, look, I'm going to leave that for God to decide. I'm not going to vote. What do you say to the person who's going, not only don't get involved in the affairs, but hey, I don't want to vote because I think God's in charge. And if God's in charge, well, then I'm not going to vote. It's like casting lots. That's like drawing straws. Who's going to get the short stick? It's like gambling almost, is kind of what they relate it to.
Well, I hope that they do not share the gospel with any other person, because God needs to decide who's going to heaven and hell. And I hope they don't have brakes in their car, because God's going to decide whether that car needs to stop or start. Again, why choose that and not choose that for any other aspect of life? Why do we single out that area and say, well, God's going to choose? No. What happens is God made us stewards. Now, here's what I think is so interesting. Going back to Genesis 1-2, as you so well know, God gives us the creation story twice. One's kind of like a 30,000-foot view. One's kind of like a 15,000-foot view. And so, he separates the firmaments, and he separates the waters above, waters below, and the light and the darkness. And then we've got the oceans and the animals in the oceans. Then we've got the plants and the animals, etc. And it's interesting that after he creates all that, it says that God looked and he saw that he had no one to tend his garden. So in verse 5 of Genesis 2, it said, that's why God made man. Our purpose for being here is to take care of his stuff. It's to tend his garden. What's his stuff? The Bible says the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof. Everything is his stuff. He put us here to tend it. And he repeats that in Genesis 2:15, that God assigned Adam to tend his garden. Well, look around us today. We got gardens in economics and politics and education. We've got it with family. We've got it with media, with entertainment, what is often now called the 7 mountains. We're supposed to be tending his stuff, taking care of it. And what I point to specifically is 2 great parables Jesus gave, one in Luke 19, the other in Matthew 25, where he called his servants to him and said, look, I'm going to be gone for a while. Here's my stuff. You guys take care of it until I get back. And so when he got back, he called for an account. And one guy said, man, I took what you had, did 10 times as much with it. Way to go. I took what you had, did 5 times as much with it. Way to go. This other guy said, I took it and I didn't do anything with it. He said, you wicked servant. And he cast him into outer darkness. God has given us a self-government. It belongs to we the people. We can make it turn out how we want it to turn out. He is not going to get in and overrule. If he had done that, he would have made Adam and Eve make the right choice at the beginning. He gave them a choice. He didn't force them to choose right. They chose wrong. They paid a price for it. That's the story of the Bible, is we get choices to make. And if we sit on our duff and do nothing, we'll be like those servants in Matthew 25 and Luke 19. He comes back and says, I gave you America. What'd you do with it? I didn't get involved with that. Oh, no, that's not an acceptable answer. There's one more that I would point to. I have a rabbi. As an evangelical Christian, I have a rabbi, and he's an Orthodox rabbi, and I cannot tell you how much I've learned from him. And one of the things he was telling me, he said, now you do recognize, David, that when God first spoke to Adam and Eve, he spoke in Hebrew. That was the first language of man. And so that means that the Hebrew language, every word in the Hebrew language is a word that came out of the mouth of God, because that's the language he spoke to them. I said, got it. He said, now, that also means that what you cannot say in Hebrew is very significant. I said, wait a minute, run that by me again. He said, for example, he said, did you know you cannot say the word coincidence in Hebrew? I said, no.
Wow.
He said, you can't say coincidence because in God's mind, nothing is a coincidence. He ordains it. He said, the reason you can't say it is it never went through God's mind, never came out of his mouth. Nothing's a coincidence. It's planned, it's guided, it's direct. I thought, that's really good. I said, what else can you not say in Hebrew? He said, well, you cannot say the word retirement in Hebrew. There is no word for retirement. There's never a time when God does not expect us to be productive. Our age may change, our career paths may change, but we're always supposed to be productive while we're here. We never retire. We have one example of retirement over in Luke, where the guy finally accumulated enough he could retire. He said, now I can retire and take my rest. And the angel said, you fool, this is not your soul's required of you. It's like, if you're not going to do anything, let's get you out of there. I put you there to take care of my stuff. I said, what else can't you say? He said, you can't say the word fair in Hebrew. There's no word for fair, because what happened to Job wasn't fair. What happened to Jesus wasn't fair. What happened to Joseph wasn't fair. God has plans. He's leading things to an end. So fair has nothing to do with it. I said, what else can't you say in Hebrew? He said, well, you can't say rights in Hebrew. What we say is responsibilities. So you don't have a right to vote. You have a responsibility to vote. When we think of it as a right to vote, then it belongs to us and we can do what we want to with it. When we think of it as a responsibility, it belongs to him. And now we have to take care of it and use it the way he would want. So if I am saying, okay, God has given me a vote, my question then becomes, God, who do you want me to cast my vote for? And that's where I'm going to say, I'm going to judge a tree by its fruits. I'm going to see the one that God is most likely to bless just by what their policies are. And I can say, well, on the one side, I definitely know God wants Israel blessed. I got one candidate who does that, one candidate who doesn't do that. I know that God wants unborn life protected, whether it be Psalm 139 or Jeremiah 1 or whatever. I got one candidate who does that. I can just go down the list. And so I'm a steward. I don't have a right to vote. I have a responsibility to vote. And that's the other way I would answer that question, Eric.
I think that's a profound answer. I'm continually amazed at the people who say don't vote, because I go, look, I recognize we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and powers, but the battle is taking place in the flesh and blood here. I mean, we have to live out the battle that is taking place. Craig, I appreciate this, and I'm interested in David's response to this. Craig just posted this in the chat. Supporting the secular state of Israel is not evidence for being a Christian. Supporting the persecution of our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Christ is actually anti-Christ. Zionism is not from God. I've dabbled in talking or learning a little bit about that. I'm certainly not proficient in that, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, again, you're going to have to show me out of the Bible where that's true, because I go all the way back to Genesis 12:3, where he told Abraham, I'm going to bless you and your seed, and I'm going to make a nation out of you. And that nation, whoever blesses, I'll bless. Israel went away, but the prophets prophesied Israel would come back. It has. What has happened right now? And Zionism exists because God said, here's the territory of your land. You get from this river to this place and across here. He gave that. He said, that's my perpetual covenant with you. And unless you can show me Bible verses better than those Bible verses, I'm going to have to go with the Bible on that. And Palestinian brethren, good for them. Hopefully they'll come to Jesus. Hopefully all Jews will come to Jesus. But regardless of whether Jews come to Jesus or not, I am told to bless Abraham's children, Abraham's descendants. And he said the promise came through Isaac, not through Ishmael. And the Palestinians come through Ishmael, although God gave very clear promises to Hagar about that line. They're there. But that's not the land promises, and that's not the Zionistic promises he gave. So when you go to the Bible and see where that split happened back under Abraham, and look at the promises that were given to both sides and look at the land deals that were given to both sides, both are there. One is very clear, and I find all sorts of biblical reasons for Zionism. I also find them to be the Genesis 12 descendants. So I've got to go with that. And I know there's people who disagree, and that's fine, but you're going to have to come up with Bible verses for why you believe that, and not just the rhetoric of the day, which is where most people are.
I've only gotten to go to Israel one time. It was in 2017. And I was really looking forward to it. I'd heard all these people come back and tell these amazing stories of, oh my goodness, the Bible came to life and I saw this and I saw that. And this is where our guides, we had two different guides. We went Israel, Jordan, 16-day trip. Our guides were Muslim Palestinians. The perspective that we got was extremely different. And I found myself on the bus just sitting down talking to them saying, why are you presenting it this way and bringing up different facts and bringing up different things? And what I found is they did not have a proper understanding of this. They knew a lot of it. They disagreed with what the Bible teaches on certain subjects. And I went, there is a fundamental divide, a fundamental problem that's taking place here where they're going, look, what they've done to the Palestinians is wrong. And yet I talked to the Jews over there, and maybe you know better. You've done trips to Israel, right?
Oh, lots. We guide lots of trips to Israel, taken lots of trips to Israel, into both Palestinian areas and Jewish areas.
And talking to other people over there, they go, look, the Jews and Palestinians here were friends. And when the independence came, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, when the independence came, they told their neighbors, their Palestinian neighbors, the Jews, no, stay here. You'll be okay. Stay here. Those that stayed are still there. Those that left gave up their land. And so now they're trying to come back and reclaim something that they left. Anyway, it's kind of the overview of what I understood based on the two conversations with these Palestinians that I got to talk to, who were guides over there. So I don't know if that's 100% accurate or not, but I found that interesting. I had a friend of mine, he's a dear brother, and I love him. His name is Keith. He said, hey, I noticed your upcoming webinar, and I noticed the title for it. I said, I just want you to be real careful as you talk about this. Let me get to the point where he said this. He said, the will of the people can be seen both in the Old Testament and New Testament. Spies voted 10-2 against going into the promised land. The result, Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. The 10 spies voting no were killed by God. So he gives these examples, and he's like, hey, when the crowd votes for Barabbas instead of Jesus, when the crowd votes, and kind of makes it like this whole voting thing isn't the way to go. What would you say to something like that?
Well, in the Bible, there are mentioned 7 different forms of government. The form of government he's describing there is called a democracy. A democracy is where majority vote wins all the time, and that is the basis of what you do. Barabbas is the great example, because as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, they throw all the palm fronds down in front of him and say, crown him king, crown him king. And a week later, they're saying, kill the bum. We want Barabbas. That is democracy. It moves on emotions. The same with what happened with the 10 spies. Notice that God in each case could have intervened and changed the vote, but he let the people vote, even if they voted wrong. He told them that in the wilderness. You guys are tired of manna? You guys want quail? You're going to have quail till it runs out your teeth, and you're sick of quail. You want to vote? All right, I'll go your way. That is a democracy. Founding fathers hated democracy. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution prohibits us from ever becoming a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, which is different from a republic. A republic is different from a constitutional republic. Ours is the highest form of government, and it is not subject to majority vote. Now, we are subject to majority vote for our representatives, but we don't vote on every law. We don't vote on every policy, but we do get to choose leaders. And that's what we find in Exodus 18:21, Deuteronomy 16:18, Deuteronomy 1:15 and 16. The Bible says, choose out from among you leaders of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. What we would say, choose local, county, state, and federal officials. Choose able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. There's your qualifications for office right there from God. Choose these kind of leaders. Now, if we don't choose those kind of leaders, that's our fault, and we'll get in trouble for it. We'll have to live under really bad government. but we are a republic by choosing our leader. So we're not a democracy. The two examples he gave were a democracy, not republic. And we become what's known as a constitutional republic, which is described as being a government of laws, not of men. Now, there's a lot of republics that are parliamentary, and whatever the majority of the Congress or anybody else says, that's what they do. Not for us. We have written documents. It's very close to what Israel did when they had a leader. Every leader was supposed to go, before they became leader, was supposed to write out a handwritten copy of God's law and then make a covenant to follow God's law. And then the people made a covenant to follow that leader. You find that throughout the scriptures a number of times. What we do, similarly, we have a written contract, a written covenant. We call it a constitution. Every leader takes an oath to uphold that constitution, not to uphold the will of the people, to uphold the constitution. And then we, the people, agree to follow that leader who makes that oath. So we are a constitutional republic, very different from a democracy. God makes it really clear. I mean, that's what the prophet Samuel told the people, and they said, "We want a king." He said, "Bad choice. God gave you a constitutional republic. He wrote the laws down in stone for you. Moses had that. You've been following a constitutional republic. You're going to go now to a monarchy? Really? You want to go there?"
Wow.
So what we have is very close. And actually, in the founding days, we modeled it. Founding fathers modeled after what they called the Hebrew Republic, and they tried to emulate that. You'll find that even in Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that the national leader cannot be anyone unless you cannot have a national leader unless they're native born in America. Your governors, your representatives, senators. That goes back to Deuteronomy 17:15, where it says your national leader has to be born from among you. He cannot be born outside the nation. There's so many clauses of the Constitution that we put in there to model the Hebrew Republic. Today, most people are illiterate of the Constitution and biblically illiterate, so they don't recognize that. But that's kind of why we did the Founders Bible. This little jewel right here, you told me to mention it, Eric, so I will.
Yes, please.
Founders Bible, behind me, we have about 120,000 writings from before 1812. So I have thousands of handwritten documents of the Founding Fathers, including their writings on the Bible verses they used to create a constitutional republic. John Adams has 3 letters on how they used Jeremiah 17:9 to create separation of powers. I can go through so many other things as well. Deuteronomy 17:6 is part of what we have in the treason clause of the Constitution. There's just a lot there. So the Founders Bible, we actually take the Bible verses that they cited, show you how that produced the results we have today, and show you that came out of the Bible. So that's why we call it the Founders Bible. But what he's describing is a democracy. People always say America's a democracy. We're not. Constitution prohibits us from being a democracy. We're a republic.
Well, first, I want that Bible, so I will pay for it. Would you sign that one to me? And I want that Bible. So that's awesome. I have Ray Comfort's Evidence Bible. I love that. And I've heard you talking about it on your podcast. I really want that Bible. So I will buy that one from you. And by the way, for those of you guys listening, if you're not already subscribed to the Wallbuilders podcast, you need to get subscribed. I've really enjoyed listening to that. It's short segments you can listen to each day or listen to all of it. I kind of go and listen to a bunch at one time, and I listen to them. You guys are fast talkers, but I still go on double speed. So I'm like soaking this stuff up. So you need to get on their podcast. You guys on a couple of weeks ago talked about the concept of an oath and what an oath meant to the founding fathers. Can you give us that little snippet of why they took the oath that they take so seriously, what that really meant to them to take that oath?
Yeah, it's interesting. The oath, there's 5 oath clauses in the Constitution, and there's oaths throughout the Constitution, but 5 oath clauses. They were formed in part by guys like Rufus King out of New York, who's a signer of the Constitution, who talked about the oath clauses. And he talked about how the oath clauses reflect the biblical Christian system in the Bible. And you're going, what? But if you think about an oath, what we do today when we take an oath is we raise a hand. Oh, by the way, it's the right hand. And when we raise our right hand, we swear an oath, and then we say, "So help me God," at the end of the oath. 4 Bible verses. 1, God says, "I swore an oath to Abraham." Oh, so God swears oaths. God says, so he said, I raised my hand when I swore an oath. And then he says, I raised my right hand in Isaiah when I swore an oath. And then in Deuteronomy 10, we're told to take oaths in his name, which is why we say, "So help me God." So the founders could point to 4 different Bible verses on where they got the oath process of you swear, you swear with an uplifted hand, you swear with your right hand, and you swear in his name, which is why we say, so help me God. So they then talked about people like John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, who's a gospel minister. He talked about how that an oath is an act of worship to God, because the only two people involved in an oath are God and me. When I take an oath, I'm saying, God, I know you're seeing me, I know you're hearing me, and I'm promising you that I'm going to keep my word. An oath was not to other men, an oath was to God. And that's why if you broke it, it was perjury. So we're told in passages like Ecclesiastes that if you've made a vow to God, you keep it. If you don't, you're going to be judged. Psalm 15, it says, Lord, who'll be in your tabernacle? Who'll dwell with you in your holy hill? It says, he that keeps his word, even to his own hurt. So there is so much in the Bible about taking oaths and keeping oaths. Now, Jesus comes along and says, don't take any oath. And that was because at that point, the oath meant nothing unless you could add all these swears to it. I swear by my great grandmother on the tomb of my father who had the fifth, whatever. He said, look, just let your word count. Just be truthful with your word. And that was the simplicity of their oath. Their oath was very simple. I promise this. I'm going to uphold the Constitution. So help me God. You didn't promise that to the people. You promised that to God. And he's going to be the one to judge you if you break your word. So the oaths back then were very simple. They were in line with what Jesus had recommended, but they're also biblically based. So that's the origin of the oath in the Constitution. It's right out of the Bible.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To view this and many more conversations in their entirety, we invite you to partner with us at creationtoday.org/partner.